Hello everybody, today for the first time in years I am back behind the wheel of an Alfa Romeo Brera, and I'm asking the question, is this a future classic or a car that history has been right to forget? Now, even if you are a regular viewer to this channel, there is a very good chance you might not know that I ever did have an Alfa Romeo Brera. And if you were a subscriber back then, thank you very much. And also, sorry, because I've watched some of those videos recently and they weren't that great, but I appreciate you sticking with me. Anyway, I bought what was by far the cheapest Brera I could lay my hands on. It was a 3.2 with the V6, but it was also a Cat D, and I think it's fair to say it was not a fine example of the breed. There were things that I really liked about it, and a few things that I really didn't like, and ultimately I parted with it because I didn't have a choice. I needed to get something else, and I didn't have the money to buy something else and keep the Brera, tempted though I was to try and make it happen. And over the intervening, I suppose 6 years or so, I've often thought, you know, kind of fancy another Brera, because let's be honest here, like any good Alfa Romeo, they are absolutely gorgeous. The Brera actually first broke cover as a concept car powered by a rather sexy Maserati V8. However, when it finally made production in 2005, though it had shrunk a little bit in terms of both exterior dimensions and power plant, it still retained the good looks that made so many people go, "Oh yeah, I fancy one of those." A year after, they then lopped the roof off and created the next generation of Alfa Romeo Spider, yet another car that is easily forgotten, and I happened to see one of those the other day and thought, you know what? They're maybe even better looking. This was a period where it felt like Alfa Romeo in so many ways were on fire. But for me, what was so good about these cars is the fact that not only were they beautiful outside, they were also drop-dead gorgeous inside. And I think the interior of the 159 Brera and Spider is one of the best that we've ever seen at this price point. It still had plenty of analog gauges, but this was the era where if you specified it, you could also have a screen. This one's now had a much later one retrofitted. You've still got that trio of Italian dials in the middle for a bit of supercar flair, and the thing is filled with gorgeous leather, nice stitching, and not carbon fiber. This is a wrap. If you were to remove it, what you would instead find is brushed aluminium, which I think looks maybe even better, but is quite easy to damage and might be why this has been converted. This really is a very, very nice place to spend your time. And this one, despite the fact it's the 4-cylinder, not the 6, even sounds pretty good too. Allow me to demonstrate. Is it fast? Well, no. 180 horsepower and 170 pounds-foot of torque, that's 230 newton meters, isn't exactly a lot in a relatively large car. But it looks good, sounds good. This is my famous patent-pending 3.10 hill start torture test, and it's even doing that pretty well. Gearbox is nice, clutch is easy. Don't believe there's hill. Oh, there is hill hold. Blimey, that's nice. Visibility's decent. It's great. Now, we've still got a bit of talking to do, but if today's video has inspired you to head towards the classifieds in search of your perfect Alfa Romeo, don't forget to use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases to give you lots of very handy information on any potential used car purchase, including accident damage, potential mileage discrepancies, involvement in fire, theft, or even usage as a taxi. The search takes just 60 seconds and all you need is a registration or a VIN. And for 20% off, don't forget to use my discount code JAYEMM. So, after a few minutes back behind the wheel, you'd be very tempted to give the Brera a nice high score. Looks good outside and in, plenty of premium materials, sounds pretty decent, goes okay, but steers rather nicely, and it's relatively rare too, with something like 25,000 of these being produced, plus I think another 11 or 12,000 spiders. All in then, that's a recipe for success, right? Well, in classic Alfa Romeo tradition, no. It is instead apparently a recipe for disaster. But why is that? Well, that is a tough little tale to unpick, but I'm going to do my best. And I think it's a bit of a sad one too, because there are some areas where this car really did its very best and I think didn't deserve the hate that it got. And there are others where it absolutely did. Let's start with perhaps one of the more controversial, the engine. This 2.2 litre JTS twin-phaser engine is perfectly serviceable. It's decent enough, yes, it's got modest amounts of pull, but it's not particularly economical, doing something like high 20s on the motorway and much worse than that when you're having fun. But I suppose you could have argued that for the more economy-minded buyer, they would have gone for the diesel, which at the time was a 2.4 litre JTD. The rather interesting 5-cylinder. Later in the car's life, that was joined by the 2-litre 4-cylinder diesel, and also at the very end of production, you also saw the introduction of the 1750 TBI engine. A very similar unit, but not the same, as the one you got in the later 4C and the likes of the Giulietta Cloverleaf. But of course, for any petrolhead, there would only ever have been one option you would have wanted. That is the range-topping 3.2 litre V6, because you think Alfa Romeo and you think V6. But unfortunately, the V6 you think of is the Busso, which this did not get. And the reason it didn't get it is because by the time this and the 159 were in production, the Busso was an ancient engine. It had been around since the 70s. It was simply at the end of its life. And the fact is that though the Busso is a wonderfully characterful thing, there was no way they were ever going to be able to use it. And so instead, what you had was a 3.2 litre naturally aspirated General Motors unit, but with Alfa Romeo specific heads on it. And no, it doesn't have that rasp and that crazy rush for the red line that a Busso does, but it's still a perfectly serviceable engine. It's decent, it's nice, and stick a fruity exhaust on, it makes a fairly good tune as well. It also didn't make masses of power, in the order of around 250 horses, but that was enough to put it more or less neck and neck with the contemporary Golf R32 and the Audi A3 3.2. So, in its day again, not really all that bad. But for Alfisti, this was a crime that was unforgivable. No Busso, no sale. And I must admit that there I do have an element of sympathy for Alfa Romeo. Less though when it comes to the chassis, because for whatever reason, this and the 159 were built on a platform that General Motors had apparently set aside for a luxury car, a 7 Series competitor. And so it is built out of what I can only really describe as steel girders. And that meant that if you did buy the V6, which came with an all-wheel drive system, branded Q4, and unlike the Golf, a Torsen setup, capable of sending 70% of power to the rear, the car weighed in at just shy of 1.8 tons. Yeah, it's marginally lighter than the old Mercedes-Benz S-Class that I used to have, and vaguely the same weight as a Nissan GT-R, only with about half the power. And that is, I think, a large part of the reason why they are neither particularly quick nor efficient. Even this one, with no all-wheel drive system and the 2.2 litre 4-cylinder, weighs over 1.6 tons. That's a lot. And it got worse, because you see, this steel, in traditional Italian fashion, Alfa Romeo didn't really do all that much to protect it. And so very, very early in their lives, both the 159 and the Brera gained a reputation for subframes, well, melting. I heard stories, though they may have been apocryphal, of people coming back to their cars and finding the engine just on the floor because the subframe had given way. And though I'd like to say that must be nonsense, having seen what Maserati were doing and charging more than double the money for, I'm actually not surprised at all that Alfa Romeo got it so badly wrong. How and why, I just don't know. They must have known that salt was a thing. They must have known that corrosion was a thing. And by the time these cars were being made, it was no longer acceptable for cars to just disappear and return to the earth only a few years in. It's absolutely baffling. They also got a bit of a bashing fairly on for not being the best handling things. So much so that here in Britain, Alfa Romeo decided to take action. And that gave us this, the Brera S, a collaboration between Alfa Romeo and ProDrive. Yes, that ProDrive, the World Rally Championship winning outfit that just built their P25, a tribute to their own 22B, Colin McRae, Glory, Britain, aren't we fabulous, etc, etc, etc. And what they did was to try and make the Brera a more overtly sporting car. Rather than the sort of halfway house GT sports car that it was, they said, right, no, never mind that, let's give it some focus. So let's strip out the weight and make the suspension a little bit sharper. What they did was change the dampers and the springs, which are now Bilstein and Eibach. They also gave it these rather sexy 19-inch wheels, which are in fact 2 kilos a corner lighter than the original 17s. They put on a ProDrive specific exhaust, which is why this one sounds so fruity. And fun fact, they actually decided with the 2.2 to give it an extra Helmholtz resonator to make it sound right, something they felt they didn't need to do with the V6. They also decided to build all of the cars without the sunroof that many of the other Breras had. And this is the point at where I go, hang on a minute, I've got something badly wrong here because I must have cocked up with my research. These aren't supposed to have the panoramic roof, but clearly this one does. And this is the most Italian thing you will hear all day. I spoke to Simon, this car's owner, about it and said, so what's the deal with that? Was it an option? And he said, no. ProDrive specified that when the cars were delivered to them, that they didn't have the panoramic roof. Alfa Romeo didn't listen and delivered them with one anyway. But as ProDrive had already ordered all of the roof liners for the cars without them, they just fitted it anyway. So if you were to buy a Brera S, you got a panoramic roof covered up by the headliner. Just why? Oh my word. Anyway, they made 500 Brera S, divided theoretically half and half into the 2.2 and the V6, for which they also deleted the all-wheel drive system. And the theory was this made the Brera a much, much better car. But has it? Let's find out. So, this little section of road I dub the roller coaster because it can be a pretty hairy ride. There are a lot of ups and downs and a great many lumps and bumps. Even though it's been resurfaced recently, it's still a very, very tricky road and therefore an excellent test of any suspension. Once you're up to speed, this actually does a fairly good job of coping with it. Around town at sort of 10, 20, 30 mile an hour, this is a quite fidgety thing. It never really settles, does feel a lot bouncier than you would like it to. The steering isn't quite as sharp or as feelsome as I remember it being. I seem to recall when my car had its geo done, it was actually really quite nice, very agile. But in this car's defense, I did drive a McLaren here today. I wasn't supposed to, I was supposed to bring a Jaguar, but the Jaguar played up. And would you believe it, the McLaren was the saviour of the day. What a strange life I lead. In any case, I really love this wheel. Less in love with the carbon fibre interior and all that. I even quite like these seats. Although, they are the source of another issue I've got with the Brera. But before we get onto that, let's just have another go at the roller coaster, shall we? And this time I'll talk you through it. So, drop down a cog from 4th into 3rd. I'm doing 40 mile an hour, foot down, not really any torque steer to speak of, maybe a touch, but I think that's more the wheels getting grabbed by the potholes on the road. Interestingly, I had my foot down there in the bend, and I'm pretty sure the traction control was reining in the power. Didn't really need to, honestly, but I'm sure it was. Up over here, yeah. The car is shaking about a fair bit, but you know what? It's kind of getting the job done. It's entertaining, let's call it that. Sophisticated? No. But then this is old school passive suspension setup. It's effectively an aftermarket kit for a car from 15 years ago. They may not look like particularly much, but the brakes are pretty good. All of the controls are generally fairly nicely weighted. The steering perhaps a little heavier than you might think, but actually I kind of like that in this. It's still got plenty of feel coming through it. It's hydraulic. The clutch is nice and light. The throttle is judged very well, and there is no sport mode or anything in here. It's all really fairly simple, quite back to basics. And I like that. But it's still neither comforting nor especially sporting. Is it actually better than the standard car? You know what, it has been so long since I've driven one, I just can't remember. But I do remember the reasons why I got rid of my Brera, and I don't think they've actually changed. This is and will always be a drop-dead gorgeous car, but it is also a hatchback. And hatchbacks are supposed to be practical. Hatchbacks are for people that may have them as their one and only car, as this one's owner Simon does. And on the boot front, it does okay. It's a slightly awkward affair, dictated really by the shape of the thing. The loading lip is very high and the aperture is not super big, but it's also far better than, say, a Volvo C30. Though it should probably tell you exactly how much Simon trusts this car, that in the back he carries nearly every single fluid that it might ever require. And rather tragically, it actually did let him down a little while back when he won some free tickets for a Kylie Minogue concert, and is sadly just 30 miles shy of one of Australia's finest exports. The car let him down. And then so did the RAC, and he missed out on Kylie. That's tragic. That's truly tragic. And I am currently considering a GoFundMe, because nobody should have Kylie taken from them. The issue? The car overheated. The cause? Never quite established. They were worried it could have been something severe like a head gasket, but it might actually have been something as simple as the coolant lid not having been tightened quite well enough. Anyway, when you're sat here, life in the Brera, iffy ride aside, is actually pretty good. Love the dash, love the dials, even love the gearbox. Though sadly, it is the fabled GM M32 gearbox, as seen in many a Vauxhall product. This is made of glass and broken dreams, and does like to fail. And I believe already has at least once. But while it works, it is perfectly decent. And this is the thing with the Brera. There are so many things about it that can and will go wrong. For example, the front subframe can get crusty, but catch it early, protect it, and you'll be fine. And I wager that these days, it's less of an issue than it was, say, 5 to 10 years ago. Likewise, you'll encounter many odd electrical gremlins in these cars. I recall rather humorously that in my own Brera, to put the window down, you simply press the button down. Oh, it's brilliant! It's got the same problem. It's got the same problem. Okay, all right. Okay. So people think that I script these videos, but in my Brera, the driver's window switch had a bit of a fault, and it meant that when you pushed it down, nothing happened. To get the window to go down, you had to instead pull it up. And this one's even worse than mine. So, to lower the window on an Alfa Romeo Brera, driver's side, you pull the lever up. Now in my car, to then raise the window, you simply had to pull the lever, but slightly harder. This is not working. I think I've made an error here. Oh no. You know what? I thought I had it going up a second ago. I'm really Oh, there we go. Oh, genuine panic had set in there. Alright, so you have to deal with stuff like that. In my particular car, the oil temperature gauge had failed, and unfortunately, due to where it is, it was like a £300 or £400 job, which I was just not going to do. Mine also drank an incredible amount of fuel, but that was partly because the MAF sensor had failed. But these are all things you can fix. These are issues that can be sorted. What you can't sort, what I suspect you'll never ever be able to sort, is the fact that for most ordinary sized people, when you put the driver's seat into a vaguely comfortable position, you are left with absolutely no legroom whatsoever for your passengers in the back. In fact, in the shot that you're seeing, this seat has been moved forwards a little bit. Presently, there's about that much room for anybody's legs to go behind me. And that's a problem, isn't it? Because that means this is no longer really a nice practical four-seater family hatchback. It's a sort of two-seater coupe. But then it weighs so much, it's kind of lost its own sporting credentials. In fact, it winds up being almost as confused a cookie as the old Alfa GT. The only thing this really has, I think, in its favour is the fact that the GT is just a weird-looking car, and this is gorgeous. I want to love this car. I so badly want to love it. So much about it is fundamentally right. The looks. It's even got double wishbone front and multi-link rear suspension. So how they got it so wrong, I don't know, but then Alfa do like to do that. C for C. You know what, yeah, sure, it's underpowered, but it is enjoyable. Feels kind of special with that really steeply raked front screen, this lovely red paintwork, which is not its original shade, it was just regular red, and now it's sort of Competizione red, but not quite. I think the paint job maybe isn't perfect. And I like it, I really do like it. It's got some character about it, but my life, it's also got some massive character flaws. And this, I'd love to say, is one of these cars where, you know what, 5-6 years ago they were still big money, but now they're a bargain. They're not. Prices for Brera start at around about the £3,000 to £4,000 mark, but trust me, been there, done that. Don't buy a dirt cheap Brera, don't buy a dirt cheap Alfa of any description. Prices for the rest of the market though, well, they all seem a little bit jumbled. The top end seems to be around the sort of 10 to maybe up to £12,000 range, but between sort of 5 to 10, there is no clear indicator really of what makes a car more desirable. I couldn't tell you if any one colour makes a car worth more. I couldn't tell you if any one engine makes a car worth more. And some people consider the S the only one you want to have. Me, actually, I'd probably get the regular 3.2 as I did with the all-wheel drive system and the roof you can actually see. This is, well, look, it's bouncy all the time. And I know it's the one people want, and it's got the sexy alloys. Do like those. But it's still just flawed. And I think I could have lived with that if it had space for people in the back. But it doesn't. And you just can't fix that. Nor, I think, could you ever really make this a truly reliable car. And I know plenty of Alfisti will already be sharpening their keyboards, but look, I like Alfas, I love them, I've had a few of them, but they are trouble. I mean, how difficult is it to make a window switch? Apparently, very. But I will say this, I will go on the defensive for the Brera. This and the 159, they are the last Alfa Romeos that to me feel like when you open the door, they put a little bit of effort in. I know a lot of people like the Julian Stelvio interior. It actually just doesn't feel as nice or as bespoke as this. It's got some nice shapes and everything in it, but the materials are not great and it just feels cheap. This, they've tried. The car I now really, really badly want to drive is the 159. Finding one of those with a 3.2 in and the Q4 is actually very difficult. Brera, easy. So, there we have it. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, comment down below, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.